And thank you for all of you for coming. I'm going to try to keep my opening remarks fairly short so I can take more questions to hear what you want to talk about. And my opening remarks, I will probably not touch on education issues. I know there will be a lot of questions that will come up. Very happy to talk about any of those issues you want to talk about. Just want to make sure to highlight some other things as well in the session. So wanted to start out talking about three things, some of which are fairly high profile, some of which are less so, but all three of which I think are extremely important in what we're doing. We'll take up a lot of what we're doing in the next week. We have one more week left in the regular session, and then we come back on the 29th of April for our veto session, which the hope is it'll be about a week and a half long, but maybe a little longer than that. The first issue, and it may be one you haven't read about, I think it's going to be one of the best bills we pass all session. It's a project we've worked on for about a year and a half that I've led the effort in the legislature, looking at reforming our laws dealing with scrap metal theft. You may say scrap metal theft. Why is that such a big deal that it'd be the first thing that I mention in a legislative copy? We are estimating that last year in the state of Kansas, scrap metal thieves caused over $100 million in damage. And most of that damage was done to farmers and ranchers, done to churches, actually, have been some of the largest recipients of the damage, and to abandoned buildings that are very key to economic development. Winfield, the old Crayola factory, we're estimating $2 to $3 million in damage in that building alone. Coffeyville had their old Walmart stripped entirely, which cost the chance to develop that building to create jobs in the community. So it is a big deal that's becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. We've dealt with this issue 6 times in the last 9 years. Nothing seemed to really crack the problem, so we spent a year and a half to develop a comprehensive solution. One, to create a crime of scrap metal theft, never had that before, to make sure that scrap metal thieves, they get caught twice, go to jail, and they go to jail for a substantial amount of time. We want punishments to be real, certain, and quite frankly, painful. And for the first time, we have the scrap metal dealers, the Attorney General and the state all on board to create a new database where the scrap metal dealers are voluntarily paying a $500 licensing fee every year, participating in this database run by the Attorney General and funded by these fees from scrap metal dealers that will allow us to track every sale of every item to every scrap metal yard in the entire state, so that if you have a large or even a small theft of scrap metal, you can get on the database, you can trace where the materials are being sold, and we hope do a much better job of tracking these thieves, catching them, and ultimately discouraging them, telling them to go elsewhere where they don't have as rigorous of an enforcement structure. Pass the House right now is before the Senate, or pass the Senate before the House for consideration, and certainly hope they adopt this plan with the Attorney General's full support. Second issue we're dealing with deals directly with capers, and I know every one of these copies that I've had before, we mentioned capers, and rightfully so. When I was asked by the then Senate President to lead the reform effort of capers back in 2011, we used to every morning get up and thank the good Lord for the state of Illinois, because if it weren't for Illinois, we'd have had the worst funded pension system in the entire country. We were over $10 billion, with a B, $10 billion underfunded. Now, I know this doesn't sound like huge progress, but let me tell you, it's historic progress nationally. In the 4.5 years since we started that reform effort, Kansas is now the 14th worst funded pension system in the country instead of the second, and we're $7.3 billion in debt instead of over 10. That's a huge change. In per capita dollars, the biggest change of any pension system for the positive in the nation. To put it in perspective, we are now about 61% funded. When we started this reform effort, we were 53% funded, and Illinois was 49% funded. They're now 43% funded, and we're 61% funded. So those efforts over the last 4.5 years have worked, and they've worked well. But they're not enough. And we know that we have to keep being diligent. And one thing we're looking at this year is a $1 billion pension obligation bond to boost the caper system. Now, I've heard a lot of criticism of that. People said, you can't fix a system that's in debt by borrowing money. Well, the reason we're looking at this is it's sort of similar to if a family has credit card debt They take out a second mortgage on their house at a much lower interest rate to pay that off. They're not creating less debt. They still have debt, but they're restructuring the way that they handle their debt in a way that's cheaper, easier to handle in the long term, and gives them a long-term strategy to pay off that debt at the lowest cost. That's what we're looking at doing with the CAPER system. A debt is a debt is a debt, and an unfunded pension liability is debt. And so if we have the opportunity to borrow money at historically low interest rates, right now about 4.4%, on a system that has been making over 8% for the last 45 years, that's something that we should do in order to pay down that unfunded liability at a lower cost. Because at the end of the day, if we can pay down the unfunded liability at less cost to taxpayers, that's more money either back in taxpayers' pockets, more money in our classrooms, more money in our law enforcement back to cities and in our roads. So just because we're looking at bonding, which I again am fully supportive of, doesn't mean we're shirking our pension obligations. Instead, it means that we're trying to pay those off in a more intelligent and sustainable way. The final issue I'll bring up now before taking questions is the big issue in the room, well, really every year, along with school funding, when it comes to our activities in Topeka, and that's the budget and taxes. Now, it was popularly reported at the beginning of this year the state was facing, I heard reports of $600, $700 million that we needed to either cut in spending or add in revenue to make ends meet. The figures have been inflated, and we knew that at the time. With the budget that the Senate passed this last week, if that budget becomes law, we're looking at a gap of more like about $150 million that we need to make sure the budget balances at the end of the year, which it will. Our forefathers passed a balanced budget provision in the Constitution for a reason, and that is, regardless of the times, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of who's in charge, every year when we leave Topeka, we balance our budget. We've always done that. We always will. We will do that this year. The question is, how? What does that final budget look like? And I am very fiscally conservative. I've shown that in the 9 years in the legislature. It's not something I'm embarrassed about. I'm proud of the fact that my focus is trying to spend taxpayer dollars as wisely as possible, as frugally as possible. But you get to a point where if you keep cutting and you keep cutting, you're not cutting fat, you're cutting muscle, you're cutting bone. You're cutting it in a way that does damage to the long-term future of the state. I think we've reached that point. And so what I am, a group of us is proposing, is being willing to look at the voters of the state. And I think you have to do that in any venture you do. And I think in elected office we don't do that enough. Look at the voters and say, you know what? We've done some really good things. And I want to talk about the good things we've done because I'm proud of them and I want you to know them and want you to know the way I think they've helped the state. But we've done some things that we could have done better. And we need to go back and fix the things we could have done better to make sure that they do work as well as they possibly can in the future for the state. One of those things is the tax plan that we passed in 2011. There are many aspects of that tax plan that I think work and are working and have shown to work very well. Be able to, I've talked to you before about broadening the base and lowering the rate. Our tax code looks like Swiss cheese. And getting rid of some of those holes, exemptions, deductions, credits, but bringing down the overall tax rate, it's good policy. It's worked elsewhere and it's working here. The problem is when we passed the tax plan, when we got rid of some of those holes, we created one that was even bigger. And that is the LLC Subchapter S Sole Proprietor Pass-Through. And we heard originally from the Governor's Office and the Department of Revenue that there were 160,000 taxpayers and tax filers that were affected by that. Turns out there were about 400,000. And we were told that that amount would cost about $150, $160 million to fund. Turns out we're still getting the exact figure, but it is hundreds of millions of dollars more than that. And here to me, one of the problems that we have with that system is it's meant to incentivize small businesses. And that's good. We need to incentivize small businesses. Small businesses are the lifeblood of our economy. We've seen with Amazon leaving, et cetera, in the southern part of my district, the big businesses can come, they can leave, the small businesses stay. That is where our growth comes from. Our local small businesses that become medium-sized businesses or grow into other small businesses. We have to modify that tax package so that it does exactly what it was supposed to. Focus on small businesses. Look at possible caps, the amount of money that's spent under that. Look at ways of restructuring that. We have a variety of plans out there that can save us hundreds of millions of dollars so that we can have lower rates for all taxpayers with a broader base that results in a fair tax system, but doesn't cut spending past a level that is wise in the state. So we'll be looking at both that budget and tax side as we come back next week, certainly in late April and early May as we go into veto session. But I hope that my colleagues are ready to say, we've done a lot of good, but what we did wasn't perfect. Let's fix it and make it better. And not be ashamed to look voters in the eye and say, we're humans too. We're not going to be perfect in everything we do. But the key is that we look at that and reform the system and make it better and don't continue to replicate past mistakes. With that, happy to talk about school funding, school finance, any other issues you want me to talk about. So with that, if I can, Ross, just open to questions. Yeah.
I'm Mike Ruiner, and I have to apologize. I'm not actually your constituent. I'm Mr. Thompson. But I do teach here in Chanute. I do spend a little bit of money here in Chanute, so I'm going to ask a question.
You were my constituent for 2 years when I used to represent Allegheny County.
I have a feeling you might be wanting my vote in about 3 years. So, you completely thrown me for a loop. I had a question, and my question is now obsolete. So I'm in a difficult position because I have to rephrase it. And please, if I know that you're not going to agree with my premise here, but entirely, but it almost seems like what you're telling us is that to a certain extent, you have come to the realization, and some others, that the premise behind the tax cuts and exemptions hasn't been fully realized, and there's more of a gap in revenue than you had anticipated. Or at least it's not working quite as quickly, and so you're looking at some adjustments. I mean, is that kind of what you're telling us?
For the Small Business Accelerator,
right? Yeah.
That portion, yes.
And
I agree.
Particularly that part.
Yeah. The other
not
part,
necessarily the personal deductions. You don't want to touch those. Okay. Well, my question was going to be, if it didn't work, what was going to be your plan B? And you're kind of telling us that you're really working on that now, which seems like a very responsible thing to do. But a concern I have is that, and I know this gets kind of technical, but it's kind of like we have three kinds of taxes. We have sales taxes, which tend to proportionally impact people in the lower income a little bit more. They're more aggressive. Property taxes, which tend to probably hit a lot of middle class people more, whose biggest asset tends to be their home. And income taxes, which tend to disproportionately impact higher income. And as you make these adjustments and look for new sources of revenue and stuff, I'm kind of afraid of seeing tax shift toward a more regressive tax structure that starts hitting the middle and lower parts of the income part. Is there any possibility of that happening? For instance, these excise taxes on tobacco and alcohol they've talked about, which it's really easy to pick on people who use tobacco and alcohol, for those of us that don't particularly. But that's just an example of that more regressive tax structure. So has it been a consideration?
That's a consideration every single time we look at tax policy. I used to vice chair both the House and Senate tax committees, spend a lot of time dealing with tax policy. And in a lifetime long ago, I was an economist by training. And you bring the sales tax as an example. Details matter in tax policy. It's not just about how much money you raise, it's how you raise it. And I think that's the point you made. Sales tax, for instance. If you exempt groceries and basic clothing from sales tax, what would be a regressive tax actually becomes a progressive tax, because it's those staple items being taxed that turns the sales tax from a progressive to a regressive tax. Depending on how you deal with income, I am a big advocate that we need to be very cautious of taxing investment, because investment income, if we tax that too much, it discourages investment, it discourages the creation of jobs, and goodness knows here in southeast Kansas we need to encourage, not discourage the creation of jobs. So when we structure the income tax, we have to be careful that we're not discouraging investment in the way we do it. And then for us in southeast Kansas, my personal opinion is the most important and most onerous tax is property taxes. Because our property taxes are so high, especially in the southern part of my district bordering Oklahoma. Oklahoma's are so low. Oklahoma's the second lowest property tax in the country. And so anytime a business is looking at locating between the two entities, property taxes are a big, big deal. When residents think of where to live, that property tax is a big, big deal. And so for me, my greatest concern is that we don't push things onto the property tax. Because to me, that's where the biggest tipping point happens in southeast Kansas. That not only hurts our middle and lower income residents the worst, but from a selfish community growth standpoint, those are the things that can push people away from our area entirely. So that's my main focus. But some of the other tax issues you brought up, obviously, I'm concerned about as well.
Yeah, but what are you going to do about it? I mean, for instance, you mentioned, okay, we do tax food in Kansas for sales tax, correct? I mean, aren't groceries taxed? I mean, you're talking about if we exempted food, if we did that, which would be, by the way, a real good idea for us more liberally minded people, what would you substitute it with? I mean, do you have a plan to do something about that? Or how do we get meaningful tax relief for property tax owners without decreasing overall revenue and having our schools and roads take more of a hit?
Well, and what we've done on the property tax side in particular is focus on targeted property tax relief. Well, two things. One, the bill we passed last year, the school finance bill, resulted in the largest single-year decrease in property taxes in this Senate district that I've been able to find on record since the property tax reforms in the early 90s. So at least for 2 decades, we lowered property taxes last year more than we had before. So that's one thing we affirmatively did about it. What we've done more broadly than that is looked at targeted tax relief. The folks that are most detrimentally affected by high property taxes, your people with incomes under $42,000 that have kids, the disabled, and senior citizens on fixed incomes as well. And we have tripled the size of the homestead property tax relief program in my time in the legislature alone, which has provided up to $1,300 in property tax relief for people in those categories that earn under $42,000. And the largest recipients on a per capita basis of that homestead relief are all in southeast Kansas because of the income levels we have and the property tax rates that we have. And I know in numerous instances people have come up to me and said that enabled me to keep my home, or that offset the difference with Oklahoma so I didn't feel like I had to move. So we've already done on the property tax front a number of things. On the broader front, I think I was talking to you about the income tax reform. If we're going to broaden the base and lower the rate, broaden the base. Get rid of the holes in the Swiss cheese. Lower the rate, make that a more fair and equitable tax overall. When you get rid of those holes in the Swiss cheese that we're getting rid of, those only go to people who itemize on their tax returns. If you have an income in the lower half to lower 2/3 of income in the state, very rarely in that income range do people itemize. So if you get rid of the holes and lower the rate, that is making the tax structure more progressive because you're lowering the rate on the people that don't have the exemptions, deductions, and credits to offset it. So I would argue actually that what we've done in large extent has been progressive. The homestead relief has certainly been progressive. The property tax relief last year has been progressive. So we may agree to disagree on a couple of those things, but that's at least the logic that went behind it, at least with my vote. Sorry, that was a long answer. When I talk tax policy, it's hard to be short.
With respect to this year's budget shortfalls, you think they're going to be in the $100 and some million range?
If the Senate budget passes and we keep the tax policy that we have kept, so we pass all the provisions that go along with the budget, but none of the governor's suggested tax, like the cigarette tax, the alcohol tax, etc. we're in the $150 million range. They're running the exact numbers, because we just passed the budget on Wednesday. So they're running the exact numbers. I'll be honest with you, we were off on yesterday. I went and visited my brother for a day, so I didn't see if any of the numbers came down yesterday, but I'll definitely have them by Monday. The estimates when I left on Thursday night were roughly 150, 160 million.
And for 2015-16, I'd seen estimates of 600 million at one point.
That estimate, and I should have clarified, that's my fault. That is an estimate for 2016.
Yeah.
We're okay for 2015, which is the fiscal year that ends June 30th. The estimate for 16 is that about 150, 160, and it's the same estimate for 17. So it's the same amount for both years under what we've done already. So the problem with that $600 million number, which didn't get talked about much, it assumed that we were spending on items that we haven't spent on since the Graves administration. Literally hadn't spent on for 15 years. For instance, city-county revenue sharing, local ad valorem tax relief fund. Governor Sebelius suspended in her first year of office, and we haven't paid cents, but it's still in the law. That was about 130 million. So they were counting us as 130 million more in the hole than we really were, because we knew we weren't going to spend on that. So that $600 million number was never a real number, but we've done some other things that's brought it down to that 150 million level.
With respect to the Keeper shortfall and the proposal for, what was that, $1 billion?
House proposed $1.5 billion. I authored a plan in the Senate that's $1 billion. We're conferencing on Monday, and I hope the House will agree with our position. I feel more comfortable.
So we're going to borrow money to make up for some immediate shortfalls?
Not immediate. It's a long-term plan.
And that's kind of my follow-on question. What's long-term look like, and does the plan ever get to 100% funding?
I have anything to do about it, it will. Let me explain that in more detail. I try to be short because I know when I go talking about pension reform, I can get long-winded. But I turned 40 in a couple months, and never in my life have we funded into the pension system what the actuary tells us we should. Last time we did it was 1971. We are on pace to do it for the first time in either 2017 or 2018. And we are much closer to doing it than we've been in literally decades. So what the bonding would do is, put it, you bond $1 billion in the pension system. Our $7.3 billion unfunded liability goes to $6.3. What you do then is we pay that $1 billion in bond out of the state general fund. So we're paying for the bond separately, and we're then paying what the actuary tells us to on the 6.3, which is of course less because we took the $1 billion out. So you're making both payments. You're making them over a 30-year period because the bonds have a 30-year life. That would take us to paying what the actuary tells us to by 2017. And then you're making that amount and you're setting that amount fixed. Bonding actually increases the chance that future legislators will stick to what they said they were going to stick to, because you have to pay the bonds off. You better not shirk your bond payments. You got a world of hurt. We've never done that. I don't think we ever will. Sure hope we don't. So we are on a reasonable plan to pay that off. The issue we have is we have to do it as smartly or intelligently as we possibly can, because every dollar that goes to pay off the pension system that we don't have to could go to somewhere else. And I'm trying to set a foundation where future legislatures, I'm not going to do this forever, certainly no desire to. And when I leave, when others leave that are keeping guard right now, we'll be less and less tempted to take money away. And bonding's part of that. So we say we're $7.3 billion underfunded. We still have almost $12 billion in the Capers Trust Fund. More money than we've ever had. We're not, all the retirees here, you're going to get your money. People that are working now that are Capers eligible, you're going to get your money. The key, and we should. That's what we promised. The key is that we pay for it as wisely as we can.
Does that payout retirees look like a bubble? Does it look like a bell curve? Is it an exponential payout? Is it linear? Is this a, oh my God, 3 or 4 year problem? Or is this a more systemic problem that's going to require more payout every year for the foreseeable future?
It's a systemic problem that gets better over time.
Okay.
And the reason it gets better over time were the reforms we made a few years ago. We went to a cash balance system similar, sort of a hybrid of what Nebraska and Kentucky did. We took Nebraska's cash balance plan, made a lot of improvements on it. Our plan is honestly a model nationwide now. A number of other states are considering what gets called either the Kansas or the Kentucky plan, because ours are very similar. And what we did with that is we guaranteed a 4% rate of return. We guaranteed we have to put in the money every quarter. And so, but we don't guarantee over 4% a rate of return. That the retirement accounts go up or down based on the market return over 4%, but they're guaranteed that floor. By doing that, we've done two things. One, we have greatly limited the investment risk that the state has. And even more importantly, we've limited what I call legislative risk. Just the legislature hasn't paid what it's supposed to in the last 44 years. And what does Einstein say? You know, definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. So we're taking that and we're ensuring that no, the legislature has to pay every quarter. They're bound by law to do that. So every year we go on this new system, started January 1, we are lowering our long-term risk. Now it's going to take 30 years, even 40 years, to get all the former risk out of the system. But every year we go, it gets a little less and a little less and a little less. So it's a long-term problem, but a long-term problem we've made changes to make better. And sorry, it's a long answer, but got me talking on pensions.
You want water?
No, okay, still good.
Anything else? Yes.
Hi, my name is Vicki Wine and I'm retired. Here's what it feels like out here, at least for me. It feels like we let a lot of people who had money get a tax break, and the rest of us got stuck. And the legislature stole from highway fund, they stole from papers, they're stealing from education. And then, to add insult to injury, they seem to be berating teachers, you know, in every way they can. And that upsets me a great deal. It seems like we're almost in a class warfare. You know, the affluent seem to be doing well, while the middle class and low income are really struggling. And I don't see representation for that class of people.
I'll try to respond on each point if I can. On the tax part of it, belabor the other point. When we lowered the rate, we actually helped every part of the tax plan, but the small business accelerator helped lower income Kansans more than wealthy Kansans, really middle class Kansans more than wealthy. In that one section, you've heard my thoughts on that and what I'd like to do to remedy that. On the education front, the bill we passed last year was the third highest increase in K-12 funding that we've had in the last 15 years. It was a substantial increase.
The requirement by the court, and they seem to be thumbing their nose at court order to fund at a certain rate. If I thumb my nose at court order, I'm in jail.
We actually complied fully with that court order. The Supreme Court even recognized the money that we put in last year was in full compliance. So two parts of the court order. There's an adequacy portion and an equity portion. How much money do you put in and do you distribute it fairly? Last year we addressed the equity portion because that was the ruling from the court. And the broad consensus on that, the plaintiffs are still arguing a technicality that's small in the grand scheme of things, but the broad consensus on that is we complied with the equity order. The adequacy order hasn't been given yet. It's been in the lower court, went up to the Supreme Court, they remanded it back to the lower court. The Attorney General tried to appeal that to the Supreme Court, and they said, we're not ready yet. The lower court is still looking at that. So there is no adequacy order that we have to address yet. The school finance, every 7 to 9 years for the past 50 years, we've had litigation on school finance with one exception. It's happened in Democratic administrations, Republican administrations, Democrat-controlled legislatures, Republican-controlled, have all been found by the courts to have underfunded education. And that's been consistent for the last 50 years, which is why we're trying to look at, I think the effort on the block grant bill that came was an admirable effort and one that's overdue because we have a finance formula that started out simple and has grown more complex over time to a point that honestly defies common sense. The example I give on that is, make sure I get this number right, I think it's about 1,682 students. I don't know if it's 1682 or 1632. If your district has a lower amount of students than that, they get low enrollment weighting. If they have higher amount of students than that, they get high enrollment weighting. You don't know why there's high enrollment weighting, because studies say that there's more cost in low enrollment schools, not high enrollment schools. except for the fact that in 2005 they needed some votes from Johnson County to pass a bill, and to get the votes from Johnson County they put on high enrollment weight. These examples in the formula happen over and over and over again that were made, defied common sense, made as political compromises. It's why in state history we've reformed the school finance formula about every 25 years. And I'm glad we're undertaking that effort now, that we're doing it over a 2-year period, because I don't want to rush that formula. We need time to bring in everyone to have their opinion, to make the formula as good for as many districts and as many students as we possibly can. On the broader issue of a perception of an attack on teachers, I know that's a perception. I'm very well aware of that, and I think we've had some reforms in years that we disagreed about that I think were good reforms, but I didn't think they were good reforms because I hate teachers. I dislike teachers. I dislike anything in the educating of our students. But knowing that sometimes people who all want the best for our schools can disagree on how that happens, and how I think that some changes to the status quo needed to happen. As you may be aware, I am a pariah in many parts of the state and with many of my colleagues because I cast the vote that rightly or wrongly was considered the vote that defeated the Melcher Amendment on the professional negotiation bill that would have dramatically changed the negotiating in teacher contracts and others. Do I think the current system is perfect? Certainly not. I've been working with a number of folks to change that, as is KNEA, as is KASB, and others. But I thought that amendment went further than I wanted to go and wanted to be able to have more of a dialogue with teachers and administrators about how we can reform that system. So I guess I would close with that on the legislature has 165 people. It takes one person with one idea to, one person can propose a dumb idea and all of a sudden the headlines in the papers are, the Kansas legislature proposes X. 164 of us may not like that, but still one person proposed X and that's what you hear. At the end of the day, we'll agree and disagree on votes, but I hope you evaluate me and others by the actions that we end up taking on the floor with our vote at the end of the day. I think at least for this week, I took one that demonstrates that even if there are others that have animus towards the teaching profession, I certainly don't, and want to be here to help even when we disagree.
Thinking back, I went to first grade in 1959, and so you can all not have to sit and do the math. I'll be 62 next month. And when I walked in, and I think every child walked in respecting their teacher, and a lot of that reflected our society. Most of it, we were taught by our parents. Started teaching in 1975, first grade here at Alcott, and it started to change a little bit, but almost every parent supported their child's teacher, and society respected them. That was a given. I retired in 2014, and things have changed so drastically, and I do believe that is mostly a reflection of our society too. Whether you agree with President Obama, and I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but you turn on the television and children see somebody yelling at the President of the United States in public. Some children, if you walk in with a disrespectful attitude before they even meet their teacher. We have things that are unheard of before. We have Facebook, where a very few amount of parents across the nation, not just in our community, will get on and in very inappropriate language criticize the teacher, and in some cases use very inappropriate language, or the schools or the administrators. And I'm not directing this toward you at all, but perception is reality for people, especially in just society. And there have been many instances of people in leadership and on committees in prominent positions that have basically said publicly that they, in effect, they don't trust teachers' professional judgment. They don't listen often to the experts that are in the field, not just in education, but in other fields. And I think that a lot of fences are being erected, and I hate it that it's become sites. And like I said, the perception, the things you read in the paper and the perception of the public, it's very discouraging for teachers and professionals and people in all walks of life, because I personally don't know of a teacher or an administrator in this district that is not compassionate and gives their very best and cares so deeply about it. They certainly don't go in it for the money. And to have so many people in, not just here, but across the nation, so critical of teachers and not listening and making policies when they maybe haven't been in the classroom since they were a child, and somewhat closed-minded as far as listening, and we all lose. The kids, the parents, we all know as teachers that when you lose the parents and they hear, children hear their parents being disrespectful, we all lose. And I feel like we all need to be on the same side, and that is the side of the students. And I just feel like these fences that have been built and the aura of, I'm sure you understand, and I'm sure everyone in this room understands, and I just feel like we all need to be on the same side. And now there's several sides, and I think it's really sad. How, and again, I'm not directing toward you personally at all, how do we get policymakers and legislators and people in positions that are making policy, how do we get them to understand that we are not the bad guys? We are doing our very best. I'm retired, but there's a whole bunch of them. So how do we get that across, how harmful this is?
I wish everyone in this process could communicate that half as well as you just did. Because it is, I think, broadly the most dangerous threat to our democracy and our way of life is the fact that we seem to have lost the basic ability to have civil discourse. And I mean that in my job, I mean that with people evaluating the education profession, with Jim's job, Ross's. The internet's done some wonderful things, but it has torn down civil discourse in ways that, and I have former colleagues in the legislature say, I'm glad I left the legislature before we had email. And before we had Facebook, and before there is, I think the simple solution, and it's not a silver bullet, and it's not easy, but even when, let's be blunt, even when I see folks in red shirts that I know are coming to disagree with me, I really thank you for being here. And more of your colleagues can be here. I want them to come. We have to have dialogue. We don't. I had a leader, a former leader, not a current leader of the legislature, because I've done, in my 9 years, I've always done 1 to 2 listening tour stops in all of my towns a year. I usually hold about 80 meetings a year. I sit and talk to people. And he stopped me and said, you need to stop doing that. Because if you keep doing that stuff, people are actually going to expect you to talk to them, and that's not an expectation you want to give them. That's sad. And if that thought pervades the legislature or any elected body, that's sad not just in relation to the teaching profession, it's sad in relations with every profession. And we do that too much. And one thing, I love representing Southeast Kansas. I'm the luckiest guy in the legislature to do that, and I know it. But one thing that I think we do better here in Southeast Kansas than in a lot of other parts of the state, I'll compare the emails I get from folks with some of my colleagues. And, from folks in the room, I know I've gotten emails, please vote this way on this for this reason. I know you didn't like how you voted on this one, but if you could do this, that's great. And we can have dialogue. I mean, I've seen some emails that are just horribly, horribly hateful and discourage the same dialogue, and the cycle continues, and it goes and it goes. I think, honestly, statewide, the more legislators you can get in the classroom, the more people you can get to visit your schools, the more you can have dialogue with, agree, disagree. We're not coming for any policy position. I want you to see what my classroom looks like for an hour, or what this classroom looks like for an hour. And it's a small step, but I think that's where we start. I think being able to have that dialogue, and then to step back from that, if we can get that level of trust established, being able to have a dialogue where, just because I want to change the school finance formula, say, you can use a lot of other examples, doesn't mean I hate kids, doesn't mean I hate public education. Let's have a talk about what's good and what's bad and what's the best way to do it. And I really hope, maybe I'm being naive, maybe I'm being overly optimistic, I hope that's what the next 2 years are. It's one of the reasons I supported the block grant bill. Also, it had some good things in it for Chanute specifically that really made me support it. But the reason I supported that is we are now in a 2-year window where we know we're not keeping the status quo, and we know we have to have a dialogue about it. If we can, on this one extremely important issue, be able to bring people together and say, let's have a large table, we'll agree to disagree, but let's talk about how we can do this best. I hope that's a way we can build back some trust and build back, because we have to. And if we don't build that trust in this process, it's just going to get worse. So I hope that's helpful. But it's
And
my
I can assure you that, and you know this, being from a family of educators, every teacher would love to have that happen. I don't think every legislator is wanting to have that happen. I once asked a legislator that was in a leadership position which standard and common core did he disagree with, and he said, well, he never read it, he didn't need to. And that is wrong.
Yeah, it
And
is.
Ed used to say that the most dangerous time of the legislature was the end of the veto session. And it also is discouraging that no matter how you believe on a lot of issues, it's illegal to do things at the last minute and disregard what's gone through committees and be attached to something, but I don't believe it's ethical. And I still remember the last time I heard Ed speak on the floor was he was speaking out for 2 sets of people that did not always have a voice for themselves and couldn't speak out, and that was children. It was the last day of the veto session in the House. It was children and people with disabilities. And I think we have such an obligation to speak out for those. And I still remember you meeting me that the last night of the veto session in the railing there, and you asked my opinion about something on education because you knew you didn't ask me as Ed's wife, you asked me because I was in education, and I won't forget that. And you listen to people. So, but there are so many that don't. It's hard.
No, I understand.
Can I ask 2 questions?
Of course.
One question is back in reference to the Melcher?
The Melcher Amendment.
Melcher, the P&A. Didn't you originally vote for that, and then when they did a second vote, voted against it?
I voted to let it go to final action. And you have 2 votes. We had a vote to let it go for full debate and final action, and a vote that's for final action. I serve in leadership in the Senate. We had 2 members gone. I felt that they should get a chance to vote on the final bill.
So that was your reason for switching your vote?
I had not, and I told Jeff at the time that I have a lot of folks I want to talk to. I don't have a final position on this, but I think it's fair that the 2 people that are gone get to have their say on it. And that part of being in leadership in the legislature is making sure the people that entrust you with leadership have an opportunity to express their views. I felt it was my duty to give them that. And so, and I hope Jim isn't mad at me for saying this, but I called Jim. I called about 8 other people that are on school boards that are teachers and talked to them and said, I think we need changes. Is this the right way to go or is it not? And went through and talked and had those dialogues, and they convinced me that it wasn't.
Why was that bill even brought up? Because last session, the legislature charged the 4 educational entities with looking at negotiations and coming up with a plan, which they did, and they presented it this year in both the House and the Senate, but yet no one would listen to USA, KASB, KNEA. Why, I feel like sometimes in the legislature, they are spinning their wheels about things that should already be decided.
And I guess my thought on that, it wasn't, and I voted for that plan as well. We created the K-12 commission. On this issue, it was split 5-4. There were 5 people that supported that plan, 4 that supported an alternate plan that wasn't the Melcher amendment but had some similar components. And I've been on a number of commissions. I've been on both sides of the issue. We wanted to consider both those points of view. And I'll be honest with you, there are parts of the majority plan you're talking about that I really like. There are a couple parts of the other plan that I really like too. Yeah. And if I had my way, I would take a couple elements of the minority report, but not the Melcher amendment. So I think there was still room to have dialogue on that. I'm happy that there is dialogue on that. But, you know, given those 2 choices that I had, I preferred the majority report, so to speak, to what we had to consider with Melcher.
Where are we with the payroll deduction for union, not necessarily, which would include union dues for teachers, but also for other public entities as well, is what I understand. Isn't it kind of a Republican ground base that they don't want big government determining things that we do? This is a situation, this is a situation where big government is telling me how to spend my paycheck or not to spend my paycheck.
The bill as it's currently structured, House Bill 2096, is broadly, should we allow payroll deductions for anything that isn't benefits, basically. And that bill we had a preliminary, we had debate on the issue, and it was pulled from the calendar and sent back to committee. I don't know if it will come out of committee. I don't know what form it will come out of committee. But the bill as it's structured now has nothing specific to do with teachers or unions or anything at all. It's just, should the state get out of the business of deducting and governmental entities get out of the business from these payroll deductions? I don't know if it's going to come out of committee. It's not a committee that I'm on that it was sent back to. I think it's very unlikely it will before veto session. I don't think we'll see it in the next week. If there is a debate on it, I think it'll be late April, early May.
Why? I don't understand why. What is the problem with having a payroll deduction? Why are you guys so opposed to that?
Okay, my father was a union member of the oil and gas or whatever 50 years ago. He had a payroll deduction, so what's the big deal?
There are administrative costs to it, especially in smaller entities, especially as the payroll deductions proliferate, because it's not just union dues. There are payroll deductions, many payroll deductions beyond that, and that is an added cost that local units of government, the state has to bear. And to me, it's just a philosophical question and a bottom line question of whether that's something the state should do, or all of these deductions can be done easily in this day and age through just an automatic bank transfer, which didn't exist 20, 30 years ago. So there are alternatives there that are very easy that don't incur the state expense. So that's the rationale behind it.
And what's your view?
And my personal view is that we need to try to reduce administrative expenses however we can when there are reasonable alternatives outside. And I'm
How
willing
much
to look
money
at
would
those.
it save?
It depends on the district. I don't have the figures in front of me.
I mean,
We've
you
had
said
some-
it's going to save the state money.
It will save the state
How
money.
much?
I don't have,
About.
I don't
Are we
have that
talking
in front of me.
millions of dollars?
Probably not millions and millions of dollars, but I know it was in the hundreds of thousands. But I don't have the exact figures in front of me.
I have another one, since we're like, war on teachers. Sometimes I feel like I'm getting penalized for being a teacher. Like now, I don't have a problem having my fingerprints done, but why do I need to do it every time I renew? It's in the database. Can't you, I don't understand why I have to pay an additional $50, $60 every time I want to renew to have my fingerprints tested.
And we
Why is
don't,
once not enough?
that was actually a request by law enforcement agencies that deal with it. Their standard fingerprinting procedure is to redo the fingerprinting every 3 to 5 years because of changes that can occur. That gives them a more accurate read. That was a request that they had. I have no problem with taking that out as long as the law enforcement agencies that would deal with it would be fine.
How many times have they caught a teacher who abused a child with these fingerprints?
It's actually, I mean, that's under current regulations. This is being done already. This was done to streamline the system. It's not a new, as you know, it's not a new requirement. It has been done. I know there were examples given. I don't know how many of them, but it has been.
Like
It has been
doctors
done.
and nurses, are they gonna have to come up for this because they work with children? What about preachers? I mean, there is all kinds of employment that works with children that are not required to be fingerprinted.
A lot of them are, that are government employees, a lot of them are. And I don't know all of them that are. And, you know, employees outside the government sector, there's obviously
Yeah, are
limitations
they
you have.
every 5 years, every how often?
That's the standard requirement, yeah.
For them too.
I was fingerprinted this year, quite an experience. And I'm just wondering, law enforcement is in favor of fingerprinting all of them because there are a lot of small police departments like Chanute, and my fingerprints were denied because of whatever reason with the KPI, FBI, or whatever. And so I'm wondering if that is creating a strain on actual police departments from smaller communities like ours.
The KBI maintains the database, and I don't want to say individual law enforcement's for or against it. The standard KBI procedure when you do fingerprinting is they want the fingerprinting redone every 3 to 5 years because of changes that occur in fingerprints and the better reads that you get off of more current fingerprints. That is their standard procedure. As far as the overall fingerprinting policy that we have for teachers and others, and there are a lot of others, they haven't taken a specific position on that.
I just have a quick question. You were talking about, the $600 million and all those numbers that are coming through. We're still pretty anxious because we don't know what the revenue, I don't know if the economist's going to be here pretty soon and do the projections.
In about April 20th.
Okay. That's making us kind of anxious as we're thinking, okay, it had, several months it's been coming in behind. Is that going to be a continuing trend? The other thing I guess I do want to say that I do appreciate that your efforts helping Chanute out. I don't know if a lot of folks know. With the Neosho County Ash Grove tax issue, our school district was expected to lose about over $2 million, closer to about 3 something if depending on how the Board of Tax Appeals comes out. But the bill that was coming through to fund education was going to almost double that. And we were going to be out like $4 or $5 million. And so once I figured that out, because that was happening so fast, Ross helped me out. We got Senator King, and once they saw those numbers, Senator King set up some important meetings and got the Chanute amendment added to the school finance bill. And because of that, the money that we would have lost, that millions of dollars, has been down to probably 25% of what it would have been. So we're going to be able to recalculate our state aid based on the valuation that's coming out of because of the Neosho County Ash Grove issue. So honestly, our district has been saved because of it. So Senator King, I do want to compliment you on that. I know you used a lot of political capital on behalf of Chanute. So, and even the day I went up and watched the amendment get passed, and you would think it would have been a slam dunk because we have the most unique situation in the whole state out of 286 school districts, and there were people that were grinching about Chanute. It was the craziest thing. My wife went up with me because she wanted to see how the legislature worked. And so I had her sit in with some of the lobbyists, and they didn't know who she was, of course. And she said, Jim, you wouldn't believe the kind of language you're using about Chanute. Because now they all wanted the same thing. So Senator King had to fight that. So, but I am, just so you know, we are a little anxious, of course, how the tax revenues are going to continue to do it. And even though the legislature is trying to take care of it, what's going to happen,
Is that Chanute thing during the life of the block grant, or is it just for 1 year?
3 years. This year, the next year, the next year.
Yeah,
So
actually,
it is
3 years in a row?
yeah.
during the life of the block grant.
And actually, and Dale Dennis is the guru for school finance in Kansas. He worked with Senator King and other folks. And that was phenomenal because it actually gives us a jump start this year. So that, you're right, it's a 3 year.
Thank you with that.
Did you have a question?
No, you got it.
You did.
I have a question. I've got 2 articles, yours that you put in the Chanute Tribune about how much Chanute is going to receive, and then I have one from a few days after that for the Chanute Tribune on the front page, and I don't know if you've seen this one or not, but the numbers don't jive.
Are they different?
Yeah, we don't understand the number difference.
You mind if I see the other article? I know mine, but...
In relation to the block grant.
Okay, I'll let you say that because I know mine.
got it all memorized, you're better than me with numbers.
Well, and Chanute, but to his credit, we did enough work with Chanute, I almost do have it memorized. That was a week of intense work on that, and I appreciate your comments very much. They do not,
They don't jive.
they don't have the money that we put in here. I will actually, do you mind if I'm, well, now I said that, now I should make sure to.
So are the other school districts correct?
Yeah, that's exactly what they did. They didn't put the, that's
Well, it says it
training.
came from,
The paper didn't put the Chanute amendment in here. This is what the funding would have been if,
We
with
didn't
Jim's
do it.
leadership, Ross's leadership, and a little blood, sweat, and tears, we didn't get the money in. Because it's about 725 to 750,000 additional each year for 3 years. So if you look, if you take these numbers and you put, it would be, if you put 750,000 onto them, they're almost exactly these. So they just got these numbers, the original numbers before we put the Chanute amendment on. So these show why the Chanute amendment was so important.
What about the other numbers from the other districts?
Were they different
Yeah.
as well?
yes.
Let me look at that, because the
Is it-
Chanute number is almost exactly the same.
Is it Caper's contribution? to the
No,
Because his says state
Mine
is
take,
not.
mine took capers out,
That's
because
what
I
I
wanted
thought
to
too.
compare apples to apples. Let me see what Erie looks like.
I had one last question on a little bit different issue, because I used to work for the state. I had 24 years in the social services. And when Senator King was talking about now down to the muscle, that's what I hear from the state. They are having a great deal of difficulty hiring social workers because the jobs they can't say if you're ever going to get a raise because of the current funding situation. They have closed so many offices that workers are driving huge amounts of miles to go do their job. And therefore, being able to hire quality people is very difficult for them, as well as under a great deal of strain to try and do their job. And I just, when I hear you say, well, we got all this to look at, we're going to be cutting, it just scares me that it's going to be even more. You know, I just think they've been hit so badly as it is.
I guess two responses. One, to answer the first question, the Erie difference between the Chanute article and Erie, I am comparing last school year, this year, the next year, and the next year, so 4 years. The Chanute article is comparing this year to the next year to the next year. The numbers are actually the same, or very, very close to the same. It just didn't have, the Chanute article didn't compare it last year, whereas mine starts with last year's baseline. So it's just a different baseline that's being used there. The numbers are within a few thousand accurate other than that, at least from my quick review. On that issue, when we did the block grant, there's a commitment that was made that we have to honor, and that is we have promised a certain amount of funding for the rest of this school year, the next year, and the next year. We have to honor that, and I have to fight, and I will fight to keep that promise that we have made under the block grant for the next few years. That's why it was so important to get the Chanute amendment in, because that's a level of funding that we need to stick to as a baseline. And it's my hope, and it will be my work, that there aren't further cuts on that as we get it forward.
First of all, sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Ken Erickson, even though I've got the red shirt on. I'm not a teacher, but I've been subbing this year, and I really just like to echo what Margaret said. My background, sales and marketing for Wichita-based aircraft company, but I've been subbing this year in the elementary and middle school. I am astounded at the responsibility and the sort of unfunded mandates that are put on these teachers. I've taught some special ed classes, I've taught elementary, I've taught middle school. You know, and I think I've subbed maybe 20 days this year. I've been blown away and had my mind opened up as to the real heavy responsibility that keeps increasing every year. And I certainly see with my wife as a teacher, it really does feel to me like education has been put in the crosshairs. You know, I think Common Core is in that, the issue of funding is in that. But I guess I would say I really would challenge you and every legislator to not just spend an hour, but spend a couple of days in a classroom, because this stuff's not academic anymore. It's amazingly behavioral. And I mean, to Margaret's point, it's like this stuff they shouldn't have to deal with every day. I mean, and Dr. Hardy told me when I started, he said, you know, you're not just going to be teaching the kids, you're going to be teaching the parents. So there's a whole thing going on that's unrelated to academic behavior, to academic performance. There's some seriously low-performing students that, honest to God, I don't think they're ever going to get up to this level, and yet they're all thrown in the pool, of standardized testing. And so when I look at that, and I know Kansas is a Republican state, it's hard for me not to come away with that same observation that teachers are being put in the crosshair right now. And maybe it's an easy mark to say education's half of our budget or whatever. We need to do something. But I would encourage every one of you guys to spend a week in a classroom. If you can't, don't open your mouth and presume to know, because it is mind-blowing. And then you see these special needs kids that have a para following them around all day. Wow, the cost is astronomical. I mean, and that's all sort of what the state has said you're going to do. Oh, you're going to do this and this and this and this, and by the way, there's no money to do it. So it's been an interesting perspective to come in and look at education from the outside and see what you don't see even as a parent.
And I don't do it for like trying to get press about it. I do it because I think it's my job to get the background I need. Every school district in my district I spend at least a half a day with in the classrooms, walking through the schools, seeing the schools, talking to people. And those two left I will get when I come back from break. And more than that, I come from a family of teachers, but did not used to coach high school, but never taught in the classroom. And we can't be experts on everything to do our jobs, but we need to be willing to talk to the people who are. Even the ones that have a lot of different perspectives, because there is not uniform view on some of these issues within the education community. And there are a number of people I try to talk to, a couple in this room, to get that perspective from all sides to figure out what to do on these issues. Not always everyone agrees, but I think your perspective is good.
I want to say, I want to talk about switches of education to healthcare. We have such a gap of so many families, I know it's affordable cost care, that actually don't have insurance. What are we doing at the state to help those people? I know there's issues about passing, we refuse money from the federal government. So what is Kansas plan to help people?
We've been looking for, intensively for the past probably 9 months, but the people have looked long before that, at how we can expand Medicaid in a way that is most beneficial to Kansas. I am not in favor of just taking the current program and duplicating it and putting it over onto a different set. I want to make sure that we provide health care for the folks in that 100% to 135% of poverty level that expanded Medicaid would hit. But at the same time we do it, try to help the folks in that income level get more income. Because the best thing that could happen is we address the healthcare needs of people in that income level, and then they make more money so they can address the needs in another way. That's, to me, the best solution for everyone. We were looking at, and I personally was looking a lot at, what I'll call the Pennsylvania model for expanded Medicaid, and that is a model that takes expanded Medicaid using private sector involvement, using private insurance involvement in expanded Medicaid, at the same time putting workforce development and job skills training requirements in that, so folks that wanted to get a better job, that needed different skills, the state would provide that training, that they have to do it as a part of expanded Medicaid to try to be able to get a higher paying job and get into that higher income level. CMS, the federal bureaucracy overseeing Medicaid, denied that and has stated that they are refusing any sort of workforce training tie-in, which I think is, quite frankly, awful policy. But we are trying at the state level to work with that restriction the federal government has put on us to expand Medicaid in a way that can still help folks earn more incomes at the same time we're addressing their health care.
Yeah, I agree with everybody wants to earn more income, but we have a lot of people who are working, Walmart, whatever, that still can't. I mean, what about those folks? It's not that they don't have job skills. It's just, this is all that's available. This is what I'm going to
Hey,
pay.
somebody has to do those lower income jobs. Someone has to do them. So are they always going to be denied health care because they don't fit it? Because we won't expand it.
No, and those, if you're looking at the income level that we're addressing here, you're dealing a lot with adult health care usually for, you're not with expanded Medicaid, we're not dealing with child health care. To me, a lot of the ideas, what we see at Neosho Community College, a lot, which how can we provide job skills training that will help folks, a lot of the times who are employed, get employed in a sector that has a higher paying job. One member of the family does, or both. There are jobs, we're getting more, there are positions available. We talk to businesses, we talked to a number of businesses in the area that said, I'm hiring, but I need someone with a skill set that fits this position. And being able to incentivize training towards that position, whether it's successful or whether it's not, to give people that skill set is a beneficial thing to have.
Well, I agree, but
what about those who aren't going to?
Yeah, there are
But
always going to be people
that's my
that
whole
have to
point.
take those lower, we need those people.
No, I know. My point is,
Those that have nothing.
if you do the job skills training and you stay in that job under expanded Medicaid, you would still qualify. I'm not taking that away. We're saying have the opportunity to get the skill set that might help you get a higher paying job. If you get it, fantastic. If you don't,
So-
I mean, it's the premise of education, to give people the ability to have that
But
foundation.
you're saying, will the state pay for them to get this education?
That was under the Pennsylvania plan, what we would do.
How can
And the
we
federal
afford
government
that?
rejected that.
How are we gonna afford that?
Look at the Partners in Change program that happens right here. It was pioneered literally in Chanute. That program costs about $600 to $700 and has a success rate of finding good employment of 73%. How can we afford not to do that? The people that pay taxes are paying more than $600. So we have funded at the state level greater participation in that.